Today's episode of The Watch is brought to you by an oral history of The Office podcast. 15 years ago, the American television landscape changed forever with the launch of a new series that struggled initially, but became one of television's most beloved and enduring comedies. An oral history of The Office pulls back the curtain on what went into creating this unstoppable force in American popular culture and why it continues to resonate with new audiences today. Hosted by Brian Baumgartner, who you know as Kevin Malone, and produced by Propgate Content, the podcast features interviews with the cast and creators from the fictional Dunder Mifflin Paper Company and reveals some never-before-heard stories from the people who were there from the very beginning. You'll hear from Steve Carell, John Krasinski, Rainn Wilson, Ricky Gervais, and more. The show is now out, so check it out and listen for free on Spotify.
I need support staff to clear the room. Stand up and walk. Now.
Hello and welcome to The Watch. My name is Chris Ryan. I am an editor at TheRinger.com, and joining me on the other line, my blue check for life, it's Andy Greenwald!
What a tough afternoon for us, Chris. Do you think this is too niche? Do people know what we're talking about?
I am full of high-octane, high-performance gasoline today because we are recording before 2 p.m. West Coast time. So your boy is still on the upswing. I have to tell the Watch listener something, and now that we're really talking, welcome to Thursday. Dare I call it the re-up? We haven't called it that in such a long time.
Oh, yeah.
But usually, Andy and I record later in the afternoon to accommodate certain people who can say. You know, who can say. But
well, it's to accommodate certain people's certain dependents. But yes,
sure. But like, I'm willing to do that. I love you, man. And I love this podcast. But I am so much more hyped for this episode today because I feel like I still am riding the vapor trails of my morning coffee. Okay. You know, the purity and the energy and the protein in my breakfast is still flowing through me. And I'm just ready to rock, man. It's 12:30 in Los Angeles. Everything's going great in the world. Let's talk about pop culture amongst friends.
God, I wish I could meet your energy level. I'm having a real, protein roller coaster myself. Just had cereal this morning. Thought I would be eating lunch before this. This 12:30 thing, it's thrown me. So it'll be interesting. There's just a different dynamic. I'm making excuses before we start. Did you want to tweet anything yesterday when Blue Check Twitter was down?
No, I've been going through a series of blocking myself on Twitter.
Like just to kind
of, it's really not for anything other than the fact that I feel like my attention span is being shredded by being at home so much. So I just like constantly am like refreshing. So I just kind of like, I only have like one device that I can look at Twitter on, and it's kind of not very
your wife's
pleasant.
T-Mobile sidekick or something? Like,
that's the thing is that like, if I ever try to block Twitter for myself, like I can count on you and my wife being like, did you see this? And sending me tweets all day.
That's true. And I apologize for that. My problem is the only things that I want to contribute to the discourse, not in a podcast format. And we're very lucky to have this platform to communicate our deeper thoughts on the launch of subscription streaming services and the like. But every so often I'll have a thought that I kind of want to share. And this morning, I wanted to have this thought, and I thought about sharing it with you. And I was like, nah, maybe I want a larger audience for this thought because I feel like I'd like other people to share it. And the thought was, isn't it weird that in 2007, Bruce Springsteen released a Magnetic Fields album? Because he made this album Magic that essentially was Magnetic Fields songs. Like, he was deeply inspired by the work of Stephen Merritt. And I feel like that is very specific to two of my interests. Three, if I like 2007 too. And then I was like, maybe I'll find other people. That was a good year.
Was it?
Yeah. But I was like, maybe I got married.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there were a couple other things. But
killer.
Like,
That's clutch.
A young,
it was a good movie.
Let me tell you, a young senator from Illinois stood up in front of the country and said, yes, we can.
Yeah.
For the first time. Okay. How about that, Gen Z? Fucking Zoomer co-host. But look, the point is, there is no appropriate place. And maybe it's better that there's no appropriate place to share that thought. If I want people to listen to the Bruce Springsteen song, Girls in Their Summer Clothes, people have their Spotify accounts. That's cool. That's fine.
It used to be like that, man. We used to just be able to log on and share takes like that. I think it's a slightly like more charged atmosphere now.
Now I'm ready to cancel a hipster jam company. So I know where to put that thought. That's what I'm fired up to do this afternoon. But really, we should talk about pop culture because, among other topics, I made you and our listeners a promise a week ago, much like that young senator, charismatic senator from Illinois, who's now getting into the podcast space. We're not feeling the pressure.
No, not
I made
him.
a promise that I would do my homework and catch up on
You would watch a TV show.
the premier German language science fiction opus of our time, Dark.
Uh-huh.
And I did it. And we're going to talk season 3 today, among other topics.
Right. So what, the first 2 episodes of season 3 today?
Boy, was that a...
No, it's not a dig.
Was there
it's
a little barb
It's not
in
a
there?
dig. It's not a dig. I was just saying, we're going to do the first 2
teeth.
episodes of season 3. I think we can chat a little bit about I May Destroy You, although it was another heavy one. And it was another one that I thought was... I don't know that I have a ton more to say about what the show is doing after this episode than I did last episode, which is essentially lauding its use and careful deployment of ambiguity. And leaving it, I think leaving more to the viewer than it's maybe even getting credit for at this point. So we could talk a little bit about the most recent episode of I May Destroy You. I wanted to ask you a question that sort of is borders on the personal, but it also is certainly in the professional. Every once in a while, we've asked you to talk a little bit about this, but I noticed this week that the Writers Guild, who is obviously the major union representative of screenwriters and the like in Hollywood, and they had been in a long-standing, I guess, would you say, at an impasse with the talent agencies of Hollywood, right?
Yeah.
Over this idea of packaging. Now, just for newcomers, can you explain briefly what packaging is?
Sure.
Or do you need your lunch first before you?
I mean, it'll be interesting. We'll see if I'm going to take some energy out of my deep analysis of small town German incest, but we'll save that for later in the episode. I'm sure I still have enough gas in my tank for that. So packaging, this is the back of the notepad scratch version of it, but packaging is an industry practice that began quite some time ago. And when it was initially talked about, what it referred to was this idea that what made super agencies, and they're basically now big 4, William Morris Endeavor, CAA, UTA, and ICM. And
I'm represented by all 4.
It's incredible by you.
In different quadrants of my work. So
in different fields.
Yeah.
That is an amazing flex by you. The idea was that if you were with a high-powered agency, they could use the strength of their client base to basically build a package of a project that was ready to go, ready to sell, ready to film. Meaning, I'll use CAA as an example, if a CAA client wrote a script, CAA had the internal wherewithal to pair that script with just the right director from their client list, just the right megastars, and get it set up. And in exchange for that service, they would get a direct payment from the studio for their trouble. They would get a cut from basically carved out of the budget that went straight to them. Mm-hmm. Over time, that came to mean that became almost just pro forma for almost any deal, where it wouldn't necessarily need to be packaged within an agency. But if a writer at WME wrote a pilot script that got picked up to series by someplace, WME, in negotiating the sale of the script to the studio on behalf of the writer, would request in exchange a piece of the package, basically. So they would get a certain amount in the line item paid to them, and the supposed benefit to the writer would be that their commission fees would not be taken. Generally, as a UTA client, personally, 10% of my earnings go to my agency.
Right.
But if it is a UTA packaged show or project, they do not take that commission, nor do they take it from any UTA writers in my writer's room or on the camera crew or in the cast.
Okay.
That was how it was defined.
And then when did the conflict basically, or when did this start to get called into question, this practice?
I think quite vociferously over the last few years, as all manner of the industry has shifted and changed, and the ground underneath writers has changed a bit, and the agencies seemed quite primed to take advantage of the shifting sands, and writers felt a little bit exposed as certain guarantees in the writing career, of which there are, of course, none because you're still a writer, but certain things like shorter season orders, more cutthroat competition, reduced back end, because when you make an original show for Netflix, it will never sell again. It will always live forever on the Netflix servers as opposed to getting sold into syndication or ultimately ending up on a streamer. So that definitely put more of a spotlight on the packaging process. The second piece of it was in an attempt to head off massive changes in the industry, the major agencies, I don't think ICM was involved in this, but WME quite cavalierly, CAA as well, UTA to a degree, started to get into production themselves. And that started to be a giant red flag for writers. Basically, the people representing us and our fiduciary interests were also content makers. And that took different forms. WME, like in part of launching their IPO, has a whole company called Endeavor, where they're actively just making shows for various people. They're in multiple businesses at once. UTA has a 49% share, so a minority share of a production company as well, et cetera, et cetera. So the WGA had a vote a year ago and they were like, no more of this. Hard line. No more packaging fees and no more production. You are our agents and that's what we want you to be. It got acrimonious super quick. It went much longer. Went on much longer. It's still going on much longer than people expected. I think the last of the mini major agencies signed off a couple months ago, but the big four had yet to crack until this week. Proud and yes, biased and slightly conflicted of interest to say, my agency UTA,
your boys,
became the first of the big four to sign on with the guild again, and I'm so happy
because it means you get your agents back, right?
Yes, and I am one of those rare and lucky creatures who I love my agents as people. I think they're great. I miss working with them. I like working with them, but I'm also very proud to be a member of the union that provides healthcare and structure to my day in life and career, and took a very hard line on something that was not easy to do. So it's a good outcome.
The outcome itself, what was sort of materially established? Was there some sort of compromise, or was UTA just like, you guys are right? No,
it's a pretty smart compromise. I mean, the thing I think that was the sticking point in a lot of the negotiations was the WGA held a very hard line saying you have to immediately disentangle enormous part of your business. And what the UTA deal suggests is a way forward, which says that they're going to begin to sunset packaging. It's going to take 2 years to detangle, but
because they have deals that are already in place, et cetera.
And they've been operating in a certain way. But the big change, and this is something that I also appreciate from my own experience, is there will be complete transparency about packaging, and potential showrunners or existing showrunners who sell a project will be given the option saying you can have a package in exchange for what it does for the commission. Like, I'm okay with entering this level of business with you, or I am not. And if you are not, then it'll proceed. Okay, it'll proceed as well.
Would you say that? And feel free to say like I can't really answer or I don't really know. But would you say that the advantage? Are there advantages of packaging from a writer's side? So like, let's say you're going out and you're saying, okay, I have this show, and somebody is like offering you that, I guess, service, for lack of a better term. What are the advantages of having that happen? Because I guess they could make a lot of things happen because they control a lot of levers, right?
It's a little, I think one of the issues is that it's very opaque. There are a lot of cooks in the kitchen. Well, this is a bad metaphor because cooks in the kitchen generally don't help themselves to slices of pie.
No, it's true.
So maybe I should reconsider my bad analogy. But maybe my agents, yeah, exactly. If it's jam, it might be. So it gets complicated where it's unclear exactly who is benefiting from what. If it is strictly you are my representative in a fiduciary responsible role, I get what you're doing. You're negotiating a deal for me, and you are getting a return on that. And that's that. There's a cleanliness to that. If and I don't think there's any issue in being transparent about this. I was and am again a UTA client. So UTA had a interest, a package on Briarpatch. Sam Esmail, our executive producer and friend of our podcast, is a CAA client. CAA had a package on my show as well. I don't work for CAA, but they had a line item in the budget that they got. Rosario Dawson, wonderful star, wonderful human being, a CAA client. Was she packaged and offered to us? No. Did the script get put on the top of her pile to read because she's a CAA client? I'll never really know the answer to that. And I think the not knowing is the part that I'm uncomfortable with. I'd love to say that it's because she responded to it and it certainly worked out to everyone's best interest, but I don't actually know. And I think that is an uncomfortable position to be in. That said, writers in my writer's room who got the job and were excited to work on it, and then were told, oh, by the way, by their agents at UTA or CAA, we won't be taking 10% off these paychecks. They're happy. But it's a pretty complicated knot to untie, and I've been pretty fortunate in my own navigation of it.
Okay, so this announcement about UTA and WGA making their agreement came out. There is suggestion that the ball is moving in other places too, correct?
I would think so. There was an assumption in some of these pieces. There was a suggestion that UTA's adoption of certain standards that the WGA requests are tied to another major agency agreeing as well. Mm-hmm. But not those chips haven't fallen yet. But I will say that for writers and also for the town, gross as that sounds, it is and there are many people probably who won't go back to agents, by the way. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily what's needed for everyone. Some people might be very satisfied with just a manager or a lawyer. And many, many, many people have been never not satisfied being represented by the fine agents that are at different agencies. But there was a lot of uncertainty in the industry. Looking at the summer, there was also a major deal to be made with the studios, and many, many people expected a writer's strike on top of not having agents, which was really a bad case scenario for everyone. And obviously, uncertainty rules every industry in every town, regardless, because of the state of the world. But that deal with the studios was done remarkably quickly and well. So there will not be a work stoppage, despite the fact that all work is stopped. Was that writers?
Was the deal that was done with the studios more of a stopgap thing, or is that because I know that
another 3-year extension?
Oh,
so there will be presumably labor peace for 3 years, and a lot of the work in that deal, from what I understand about it, was laid by the good work done by SAG and the DGA.
Look at you guys, just figuring it out,
working together.
Yeah,
but again, to be clear, not working, and certainly not together. So, one can never really say how much the uncertainty in the larger world influenced the decision to make these deals happen. I can just feel grateful that they were made.
Okay. I mean, I think that's pretty much all I was curious about. I mean, I think that for our purposes, I was really more curious about whether or not what like sort of practical impact it had on the way shows get made and what kind of shows we might see going forward, and whether or not this packaging thing was more about keeping up with the pace at which streamers were demanding content, or whether or not, there was any like sort of takeaways to be had from all this.
I mean, I think from my understanding of it, and I'll be clear again, like I'm relatively new to this industry on this side of it, and I was not involved in any of the actual negotiating sessions. But the feeling that I got from the line in the sand that the Writers Guild drew was really a sign of the deep, deep uncertainty and anxiety about the direction of the industry. Mm-hmm. The centralization of it, the lack of control writers had over their careers, because the goal is obviously to get something made, but there used to be some level, as I said a moment ago, of security in it, that if you were working on a 20 episode a year show, it would take a year of your life, and it would take this much time, and you could guarantee certain amounts of income within it if you were lucky enough to be working. And the sheer amount of uncertainty in that, and then looking around and being like, so if residuals are down, opportunities are down, span of employment is down, but these agencies seem to be building production centers.
Right.
They're planning for the next great upheaval. What are we doing about it? So at least that was my read on it, and it seems to be moving in at least a slightly more heartening direction, even while the uncertainty of the industry, this is a conversation we've been having for a while, is only going to deepen, because we don't really know what can get produced and what the appetite for it is and how much money they're... Obviously, Amazon and Netflix and Apple are not running out of money anytime soon.
Did you get a chance to check out Peacock at all?
I have not.
Okay. I looked at it. I thought I'd give you a little bit of a report card from that, a little book report. It's really interesting. One of the things that's come up a couple of times when you and I have talked about this is you saying, by the way, I think you're looking at this wrong. Like, I think I kept bringing up Peacock as if, what's their original programming? How is this streaming service going to compete with Netflix, HBO Max, Disney Plus, whatever? And you were like, think about it a little bit differently, because it's also TV. Like, it's still going to have channels. It's offering a live option essentially, and also a pretty
Right.
traditional option. And I was pretty surprised how much over the last couple of days that I actually used it as such.
Yeah.
So mostly in what is now becoming kind of common with these launches where, a service launches and they immediately make something that you want only available through them.
Like The Mandalorian, for example.
Like The Mandalorian, or even yesterday, I really wanted to watch Liverpool versus Arsenal, which was not a satisfying use of my time, but I really wanted to see it. Arsenal 1-2-1, only available on Peacock, not available on terrestrial cable while it was live. So it was and that is one of the biggest matches of the Premier League season, every season, twice a year. And I, dialed up Peacock. And so in doing so, also spent some time watching its collection of essentially live channels that they have going at the, while you're there, and then perusing their library. And it's not that much different than I think we discussed on Monday. But one thing I did want to point out is that I feel like we're having a very obvious like nostalgia wave in these streaming services, where I think a lot of very old stuff is getting really, really front shelf merchandising.
Right.
Not only on Netflix where they're doing Supermarket Sweep again. I don't know if you saw that they've
and Unsolved Mysteries. Those are
Unsolved
big,
Mysteries is new episodes. Supermarket Sweep are literally episodes from the 90s, and it's like I watched the one last night
because by the way, the reboot is just people sweeping supermarkets and spraying them with high test organic. Like, just
it's not funny, but it is really weird. The land of abundance. Also, everything.
For real though, Chris, would you or would you not watch 15 minutes of CCTV footage of people just hosing down Gelson's? Like, I would watch it. That would make me feel great before I go in and.
There's a lot of scenes in Dark Season 3 that actually look like that. But I was really struck by watching Supermarket Sweep. How many of our groceries, quote unquote, just came in boxes back then?
Right.
In like cardboard boxes, just like tied, all these like different products that were in boxes.
Yes.
And also just, I was really thrown off by like, there's one game that they play in Supermarket Sweep where they ask contestants to guess like which one of these three things is over $2. And it'll be like
everything
in the 90s. No, it'll be like Kudos granola bars. Remember Kudos?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
There's a lot of chocolate drizzled on them.
Yes. Hamburger Helper and Ortega hard shell taco shells. Which one do you think is more than $2?
Say it again. The Kudos?
The Kudos, Hamburger Helper, and Ortega hard shell taco. I don't know why.
I would say the Kudos.
No free ads for Ortega. You're right.
I would say the drizzle bars. Yeah.
You're right. The drizzle.
Unnecessary.
Why is that? Is the drizzle that expensive?
No, those are unnecessary items. Whereas like Hamburger Helper is like, let us help you make dinner. And hard shell tacos just like,
here's some hard corn.
Here's some hard corn. None of this soft. Remember, I mean, people don't understand on some level. I get you have to choke down moldy jam every so often, but to grow up white in the suburbs, as I did,
was to be a child of the hard corn.
In the 90s, was to be like, Taco Bell invented a soft taco. I mean, I'm humiliated to say that now, but like that's the world that I grew up in.
I still like a hard shell taco.
There's nothing wrong with that, but I'm saying I thought that a fast food restaurant on City Line Avenue in the corner of City Line and Haverford like invented Mexican culture. That's not cool.
Life is all about learning.
Can I say one other thing about Supermarket Sweep?
Of course.
Again, not to just say that like we are totally out of touch with the way things cost now, because let me tell you something. I buy a gallon of milk very frequently for my children whose bones are forming. So I'm down with that. But I was reading. This is plug right into our demo. This is our hard shell taco demo. I was reading Wallace Stegner's Crossing to Safety last night. Great novel about academics sleeping with each other, and from the late 70s. And there's a moment when early on as the character is remembering he and his wife's arrival to Madison, Wisconsin, like for his first teaching job after getting his graduate degree. And I'm unclear at this moment. I sort of forgot when the book was written, and I don't remember what year this would be that they've just graduated from graduate school. And it's pouring rain, and all their belongings are in the car, and he drives up to a hotel. And his wife's like, "Oh, I don't know if we should, use that expense. Like we only have a certain amount of money. And he's like, you're pregnant, like it's soaking wet. Like let's at least see. So he runs into the hotel and he says, how much for a room, clerk? And the clerk says $250. And I was like, well, for a hotel room,
bucks. Yeah, that's
pretty reasonable.
It's like a Marriott. Yeah.
And then they're like, with a bathroom, it's $275.
Ooh.
And then I realize after he has this conversation with his wife that not only is he referring to $2.50 for a room, it's far too much for their budget because they have I think $150 in traveler's checks to last until he gets paid at Christmas. So
dude, academics back in the 70s. But then it's also like you read the White Album, the Joan Didion book.
Right.
And it's like she and John Gregory Dunn have not done anything like not of value, but like have not been paid at all in 1968 for anything.
Right.
Like maybe did some dialogue touch up on like a movie or something like once, but live in a fucking mansion in like, the Hollywood Dell or something and just have like lavish parties all the time that you could really stretch a buck.
But on the downside, Chris, they had never had a soft taco.
No, that's
and wouldn't for 3 decades. So, I'm just saying it's easy to look back.
We've digressed. The reason why I brought up Supermarket Sweep and the reason why we got off on this is I was struck by how much Peacock was like Cheers, Murder, She Wrote, Rockford Files. Here's 12 seasons. Dig in. Now that might be some personal algorithm that I have already bestowed on the Peacock to give back to me in terms of, but I'm not really watching those shows. I thought it was fascinating the library play that they were making.
I think I have to say, I think that's pretty smart. And I think that it speaks to the jury, the success failure jury is still, that's how juries work, right? Is still out on the name Peacock. But the inclination to steer the name more towards an NBC brand than a Comcast, Universal, USA Network, Scheinhardt Wig Company, whatever, is telling and I think quite smart. Because you and I are always referring to the value of the HBO imprimatur, right? That like that still means something, and it's still sort of the crown jewel. And if it's on Sunday night on HBO, that still means something, even amidst all of the streaming clutter. I would say that of all the, and people love brand talk. This is going to go over well with the Zoomers. That of all the established TV brands, I would say the one that has the most affection built in for it outside, at least with our generation, and maybe the generation just before or just after, outside of HBO is NBC. That partly because of its long history of shows people really loved, mostly sitcoms, mostly, whether it's Family Ties, Cheers, Seinfeld, The
Night
Office,
Court,
etc.
Yeah.
30 Rock. Unlike all of its broadcast brethren, NBC was very much centered in a place in 30 Rock where you knew that's where Letterman was. Yeah. That's where Saturday Night Live was, is. And it feels like a living place, and little things that could be cynical brand synergy, or it could just be LOLs in the office. But like Brian Williams leaving the news desk to jump up to Weekend Update or whatever, it gave you the sense that there was a place where people worked, and it had a sensibility to it. And I think that hasn't totally diminished. And steering Peacock into that built-in affection is extremely smart, because I don't think CBS has that. CBS certainly had one reputation. It's unfortunately has had a much worse one recently for what's been going on behind the scenes there. But CBS, ABC, Fox, they don't have that same thing built in. And Max, HBO Max, whatever that is, since they're sort of steering away from that HBO brand, there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to check out Brave New World, which is sort of the lead original that Peacock launched with, partially because I think I was too busy like sort of digging around and looking, they've got all of Battlestar Galactica, they got all of Friday Night Lights, they have all of this, they have all of that. And because I sort of immediately got lost in tooling around in what is essentially their live functionality and looking at all the all the channels that they have kind of brought under the same umbrella. I was incredibly charmed to be watching Sky Sports, is what I'm telling you.
And you were using the free option. You were just watching it the way it is with limited commercials.
Your boy might have stumped up for a research project there and gotten the premium no ads. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, I like to be a part of the conversation.
Look at you, Rockefeller. $275 with a bathroom is nothing to you.
Well, so moving on, unless you wanted to talk more about
the novels of Wallace Stegner. Thank you.
Hotels in the 70s. What?
It was in the 30s. That was the review.
Oh, the 1930s?
Yes.
Oh, I thought you were like it's the 1970s.
The present day in the book is, but he's remembering when they approached Madison, Wisconsin in 1937.
Yeah. Okay. That makes much more sense. I was like, that's a pretty good deal for a hotel no matter what year. Do you want to talk
even
about,
Joan Didion could have afforded it.
I want to talk about I May Destroy You before we go to a break, and then we'll come back and talk about Dark. Do you have any takeaways? This was an episode that I think might provide like a format that the show will continue to investigate, which is essentially like introducing a seemingly tertiary character and then diving deep on that character. I have not watched ahead on I May Destroy You. I'm doing it week by week, but it felt like if this is going to be a 12 episode season and it's not going to be a step-by-step kind of quasi mystery about Arabella kind of, figuring out what happened to her, this is what's going to happen. They're going to have characters like Theo, and we're going to think that they're one thing and then they wind up being another. And I think the thing that was great about this episode and great about this show is that you get to the end and you don't know. I think your mileage may vary on where you land on who Theo is and what she's going to mean to Arabella and what Arabella has meant to her, and how you never really know somebody unless you are that person. And I thought it was, I will admit, it was not like an easy episode to watch. I don't think that that's really what this show is. There have been a few recently that I found a little bit more difficult to get through than earlier episodes, but I still think, all the usual hosannas that we say for the show apply, unlike anything else on TV.
Yeah, I think that it's never the most pleasant or easy watch, which is not a bad thing at all. I think one of the reasons that we might be reacting that way and others might feel the same way is the reason for that is also one of the things I think the show should be praised for, which is to say that it is a destabilizing viewing experience because you don't know what each episode is going to be. And I don't mean what it's going to contain or discuss, but I mean literally what is the storytelling mechanism for this episode going to be. I did not expect firing up this episode for it to introduce a new character and then devote the entire episode to a flashback centered on that character. That's the kind of stuff that Atlanta, we praise Atlanta for that, or the most elastic programming of our time. And I think that the show should be lauded for that. And it continues to just kind of keep viewers on their toes because it can be anything and it can do anything. And I think what it's doing at this moment that is really worthy of celebration is, look, let me take a step back. It is very much a show of the moment because it is, if anything, above anything else, it is running straight towards the most challenging and complicated issues of our time, whether those are race, gender, class, assault, safety, the internet as good or bad or just feature of our lives. That makes it very much of the moment. What I think makes it greater than the moment is that the show, and Michaela Cole explicitly, refuses to conclude almost anything, refuses to give anyone, and include ourselves as viewers, an easy way out. It's not only does it not attempt to solve unsolvable issues, not problems, its project seems to be committed to showing all the threads and knots and complications and how you can approach this. I mean, at the beginning we talked about it being a detective show, but the show is almost about the limits of that kind of detection because you could just keep taking, okay, so that happened. Take a step back, take a step back, take a step back. Who is to blame? Who is culpable? Who has done what? And who owes what to whom? It's dizzying. And I think that kind of lack of resolution in terms of a casual watch can leave viewers feeling floored or dissatisfied or frustrated. But I think that in itself is the project, and I think it's worth commending.
Yeah, I think the project is also about chronicling how people change and what changes them. I mean, I thought that the last two episodes, actually, the episodes have concluded, and I was watching them with my wife, and I'm just like, I feel challenged by this show in a way that I feel challenged by like really great literature. or I feel challenged by like a really provocative piece of literature where I'm like, this did not end with the piece of the grammatical endpoint that I expected it to. And I don't feel like it's been given a period or an exclamation point. I feel like it's been given like this kind of ellipsis or a question mark, and you're forced to kind of consider it for longer than 5 minutes after the credits roll, you know?
And it also keeps you very alert, interrogating your own assumptions, meaning we flash back to Theo and we see she's up to something, and then we're introduced to this stepfather, and immediately alarm bells go off like, what's up with the stepfather?
Yeah.
Is he skeevy? Is he sketchy? Is it intentional that he looks kind of like Robert Carlyle in circa Trainspotting?
Yeah.
Minus the mustache, respect to Begbie. But then, cell phones and cell phone pictures, and being the generation we are, I'm like, this is a horrifying nightmare. But then for young Terry and young Arabella and that group, they're like, oh, this is cool. This is neat. This is helping. Everything is a little bit askew from what you might expect it to be. And no moment is quote unquote safe, I think, for the characters. And because of that, no moment is safe for the viewer. I think that even shows that are quote unquote challenging, I don't even mean to put in quotes, I just wasn't sure if that was the right word or not. Like even like a boundary pushing show like The Wire, there were safe spaces within the show, which are kind of old fashioned TV. Like when you were in the police department with Bunk, you were like, well, at least something horrific isn't going to happen here, and I think you could probably extrapolate that to other shows too, like even Breaking Bad, for all the peril it put its characters in. There were moments, maybe if just like when Badger was on screen or something, where you were like, this is a respite, this is a breath.
Right.
And I May Destroy You doesn't provide that, even when we're, with like Kwame and Terry and Arabella. It could turn at any moment.
We're going to take a quick break, hear from sponsors, and when we come back, we'll talk about the first 2 episodes of Dark Season 3. Today's episode of The Watch is brought to you by Blue Moon. Don't you think some once-in-a-blue-moon moments should happen more often than once in a blue moon? Like, I would like to get together with my friends who I don't see all the time, even if it's over Zoom, maybe get like a nice dinner going, a little happy hour, a relaxing night, just chatting with my amigos. Blue Moon is on a mission to celebrate and inspire more of those moments, just like those looking for the special in the everyday. Blue Moon takes a twist on the traditional Belgian wit. Let me tell you a little bit about Blue Moon. It was created during the 1995 baseball season at the Sandlot Brewery in Coors Field in Denver, Colorado. Personally, don't remember a lot about the 95 baseball season because I was graduating high school and had a lot of other stuff on my mind about my future. But who was I to say what Blue Moon was doing? Because their founder and brewmaster was inspired by the flavorful Belgian wits that he enjoyed while studying brewing in Brussels. And so you have this carefully crafted, unfiltered interpretation of those brews. Valencia orange peel for a subtle sweetness, coriander for some balance, oats, which create a smooth, creamy finish. And you get a once-in-a-kind appearance and bright taste in a well-crafted beer with a twist of flavor. Why the name Blue Moon? As someone was tasting the beer, they said, a beer this good only comes around once in a blue moon. How about that? Once in a blue moon should happen more than once in a blue moon now. So next time you're hanging out with friends on Zoom, next time you're hanging out, I don't know, watching one of your favorite TV shows, crack open a cold blue moon and enjoy a once in a blue moon moment a little more often than once in a blue moon. Blue Moon, reach for the moon, celebrate responsibly. Blue Moon Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. All right, we're back. It's Andy Greenwald and Chris Ryan and a bunch of German people traveling through time and space. And
it's Dark Thursdays.
It's Dark Thursdays, and it's also we're concluding a show that we've been talking about for the better part of 3 years, I think, right?
It's crazy. Well, I didn't talk about it for a better part of a year. But
I think that one thing that's going to be cool about our conversation, I don't want to have too much of a meta talk about the talk, but I do think it's going to be very interesting. Just so you guys know, Andy has just watched all of 2 and now is watching 3 right up against each other. I watched it as God, decreed when it was delivered to me, season 2 a year ago or whenever.
I, like Adam, declared war on God.
Yeah.
So that's why I watched it the way I did.
But I feel like, just based on the text messages, that you seem pretty fired up about everything, whereas it took me a while to get into the rhythm of this.
Well, I would say a couple things, and people have heard me say dribs and drabs of this as I was catching up. But look, it's no question that it is just, life is a little bit better when you have a big serving of a show to get into, and you can portion it out the way you like. That's just fun. It's also fun, and people know this about me, and I think you as well. It is especially fun for us when we are able to have synchronicity within our homes and marital harmony, and have our spouses on board with us.
Yeah.
And so my wife's journey with Dark, honestly, is in many ways more breathtaking than Jonas's, because what began with a great deal of disparagement and mockery has now, the student has become the master. The Meister, my German is, I'm still working it into
the Tannhaus. Yeah, right.
But she is now coming into the room with a look that is usually reserved to what did you or did you not do regarding the dishwasher, to just drop mind bombs about German time travel theory. Like, we are all in over here. So being able to go from season 2 to season 3 with just 24 hours between them has been a boon, without question.
Is your wife on the boards? Is she on the message boards?
She doesn't know what that sentence means, which I'm grateful for.
Okay. Because
her big breakthrough,
you threw an idea at me
said,
where I was like, that sounds like somebody who's been spending time on Reddit.
No, she's suddenly just like finding a different voice within herself. Like, the big technological breakthrough, thanks to Dark, was that she said, quote, and I'm quoting, "I used Google Translate for the first time because she wanted to make a I'm texting you in German joke to her friend who was also watching Dark."
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we are on the tech spectrum. So there is no Reddit happening. But she's just dropping mad theories. And that's a lot of fun.
So
that's a lot of fun.
First 2 episodes, Deja Vu and The Survivors. And I actually felt like Survivors was one of the coolest episodes of the season. It felt like a show that was like more in mid-flight rather than setting everything up, obviously.
That's because they let your boy Trant cook.
And they let my guy Trant cook. I do think Dark has a little bit of ensemble-itis where there's just so many people, and each one of these characters has had their backstory really developed and shown, that rather than, beyond the fact that they just have to land the plane in terms of like, here's how time travel works, it's also, how does this stuff affect more than a dozen people that you actually might have feelings about? I think that, and we joke about German engineering, but I just admire it. I just think that when presented with what is essentially an impossible premise to pull off successfully, I think that the creators of the show played to their strengths and admitted what the project was and never really went away from it. And part of that was, I would be shocked if any season of the show will be as good as the first. And I think they're okay with that. Like, the first season, it's always more fun to be asking the questions where you are a little bit in the dark too. And they were able to introduce us to, 24 characters who are far more related than we ever would have realized in some deeply uncomfortable ways, but made us care about them and understand them and center the show as a place about family and secrets and just overlapping lives. Second season was a lot of moving pieces. And then now we're on to resolution. That follows kind of a traditional trilogy pattern. What's nice about it is that, and partly, I kind of credit it to the fact that this is a director-driven show. It doesn't make much sense to say that when you think about how purely complicated it is. But my dude, Baron Bo Odar and Jantje Fries, I believe I want to say, and they are partners in life and creative partners. He directed every episode of this, and I don't think you can overstate how important that is for a show like this, which just demands so much of not just tone and vibe and mood, but also just consistency to understand. We talked about this a little bit the other week of like who is who in any moment. It's really the most impressive single directorial vision on TV since Mr. Robot, I think, in that regard. But just to say that it is a directorial driven show, so it just kind of stays being what it's being. Like, scenes on Dark are scenes on Dark
always. There's always going to be someone
there's
asking
also
a question, someone staring, people getting too close together, certain framing. And 3 seasons in, I'm grateful for that as the guardrail as we explore some insanely heady and complicated topics. You are never watching any other show when you're watching Dark, and I find watching Dark to be very pleasurable.
On the off chance that people are sort of watching along at this pace where they're on episode 2 or 3, I would rather you kind of handle like reactions to any plot stuff from the first 2 episodes, because I don't want to necessarily give anything away because I've finished the season.
So I would say that, so the 3rd season, for people who are now watching it, know that it creates what, I mean, in Lost, it was called like the sideways timeline, basically a mirror world, backwards world, which again, speaking to the directorial vision here, it's simple, but I love that they made it a reflection that every set and the work that the production designers do on the show is just mind blowing to not, so like Jonas's house throughout the eras.
They also made it
an apocalyptic or
incredible run on Bangs, you know, where they just bought up every wig of Bangs wig. Like
I've got 10 minutes of material on this if you're ready for it, but that they also flipped the orientation of all the homes for this mirror world. It's just a little thing, but it really is cool and it matters. So we've introduced this new world. It was kind of odd to me, I guess, in terms of clarity, that they didn't say the quiet part loud, at least until the end of the 2nd episode. And this is something my wife is all over, which is that old Jonas, or middle-aged Jonas, not Adam Jonas, but
right. The one that's
sexy
in the 19th century now.
50-year-old Desmond from the Hatch, but German Jonas, never went to the sideways world. That was news to him. So that our young Jonas, who acted like a fan who hadn't watched the show to the first season when he entered into the sideways world, by the way. It's like you spent 2 years being like, a world without me in it. And then he gets the world without him in it. And he's just like, I'm here. Ich bin hier. Marta, du liebest. But that he didn't know about this. So this was new territory potentially, and something new was developing. And at the end of 2, that Jonas stuck in the 19th century has a big tantrum because something new has happened.
Yes. Right. Yes.
So that's where we're at character-wise. But I mean, but this show's fucking wild, man, because Trant Nielsen was not on anyone's power rankings. That dude was not on anyone's game board heading into season 3. And then suddenly he shows up in this episode, and I have to remember like Mads and Ulrich and all this. And then also, I guess we should remember that he was having an affair with Claudia Tiedemann, but then he's Regina's father. And here's what I have to say about that, Chris. Do you remember in the early days of this podcast, when we were more ratings driven, like the industry as a whole, and we would talk about ratings and we would say, have you ever met a Nielsen family? Now, let me tell you, Chris, I found all of them. They are all in the small German town of Winden.
And they're all having sex with one another.
It is like birth certificates underneath the chairs in an Oprah taping. You're a Nielsen. You're a Nielsen. Everybody's a Nielsen.
Yes.
It is. Talk about commitment to the bit, because I had a whole run when I was midway through season 2 where I was going to be like, Chris, the Germans are all in on Ancest. Like that one is okay. But now it just turns out everybody in the family.
Because everybody's their own dad. It's like every single character is like, I am actually my own father. Like that's not even like a literal translation, but I think that you push past a point where it's like, can you even really track this family tree anymore? No.
No, and even, again, my wife, who is watching this now like a hawk, when I was like, oh, there's Trant Nielsen. Because, by the way, she's doing all this without having seen the first season. There's Trant Nielsen. Fun fact, Jonas's great-grandfather. And she said, please pause it. Why? So that is still going on without question. I'm going to ask you this, Chris, not just as a fan of Dark and as my good friend, but just as a human being in the world. When you watch Charlotte and adult Milky Eye Elizabeth caress each other's face in this circular infinite motion that can only occur when a mother and daughter is with a mother and daughter because they're both mother and daughter. Are you all in? Or are you like, that's a bridge too far? Like Chinatown was intense. This is just, do you ever struggle with that? Because I get, the thing about Dark that's amazing is they were like, okay, what if we took all these ideas and time travel paradoxes to an almost logical, if not morally illogical conclusion, and what happens? Like they're doing it. But does it ever take you out of the enjoyment of the drama because you're like, that's just weird? There's
a central relationship of this show that I think still resonates no matter how complicated it gets, and that's Jonas and Martha. I think that there is like a
just
love story.
One boy's love for his aunt.
Right. But like, I think that as this season goes on, you will see that like they kind of break it down to like where we're all just ones and zeros or stars or whatever. Like we kind of get away from like these sort of designations, but I understand what you're saying.
Right.
Like the further it gets away from that, the more difficult it kind of becomes to parse and also have an emotional reaction to.
It does, though, do things that I didn't expect it would do. And part of this is just the good decision making, I think, made by the creators. Part of it also might be the intentionally limited nature of the show, that it was built to be these 3 interlocking seasons. But the fact that everybody gets to time travel, okay, didn't expect that, honestly. I don't know if I was ready for like Magnus in the 19th century, not my favorite character or plotline, but it's cool that the moms get to time travel too and try to deal with their shit, which is pretty raw stuff. But also that you get these moments that you'd almost become so clinical about. It's possible for the show to break down into such a clinical exercise of like who is who to whom, that you almost are caught off guard when Katerina goes to Ulrich and you are in the insane asylum and you are reminded of the fact that underneath all of this like heady Reddit stuff is the storyline of a character who was one of the stars of season 1. His reward for going through time to find his missing son was to live 34 fucking years in an insane asylum.
Yes.
That's not cool.
No, it's not. And then that is a big moment when Katerina goes back, because you're just like, I think one thing that the show is having a hard time communicating is how time lapses. And like Katerina's been looking for him for a long time.
Can I ask you one last thing?
Yeah, sure.
If you like, do you just buy because one of the conceits of Dark is that everyone is on Dark, as I said. And one of the things people do on Dark is if you are sitting alone at a table, say in a mental institution, and someone sits with you, you don't look up.
No.
Now, I've never met anyone comfortable enough in their table not to look up if someone came and sat with them. But if you don't look up, boy, does it make a more dramatic moment. And so it's, that's cool. But like, you're at Starbucks and like you're enjoying your green tea, whatever, and someone just takes the chair opposite, you're going to be like, hey, I just want to know.
I think on Monday I would like to discuss a lot more stuff about like habits on Dark, and also just like, what are we doing about food? What are we doing about like, does Bayern Munich exist in any of the timelines of Dark? Like, are we watching soccer? Like, what is happening?
I'll leave it at this. It took me 3 seasons to relate to any moment or character in Dark, which is not an impediment to being a fan of it.
Sure.
And I didn't expect it to be the character it was. But when young Noah enters into the home wearing the same like nose and mouth covering buff that I wear everywhere now, and it's just like, I'm looking for food, I've never felt more
same energy. Yeah. Let's wrap it up there. Greenwald, always great to see you. We'll be back on Monday. We'll keep talking about Dark. We'll have a bunch of other stuff to talk about and a special guest. As always, thank you so much for listening to The Watch podcast on the Ringer Podcast Network.
Great job by us. Good energy. Keep that same energy, Tiana Taylor. Have a good weekend, Baranskis.